All right, so welcome everyone to our second LGBTQIA plus in STEM event. I think most of you know me, but I'm Nico Hazier, an administrative assistant in the Science and Math Division, as well as a member of the LGBTQIA plus Equity Team. This speaker series is a collaboration between Massasoit STEM and the LGBTQIA plus Equity Team, highlighting out queer and trans professionals in STEM careers. Thank you to our faculty and staff, as well as STEM scholars, Gender Sexuality Alliance, and anyone else joining us today. Today, we are welcoming Dr. Jennifer Petter, a founder and the Chief Innovation Officer of Arrakis Therapeutics. And take it away, Jen.
Thank you. Hi. So the organizers here, first of all, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to kind of come here and chat a bit. I apologize for the highly featureless background. I'm actually at work in an actual conference room. And you know, still getting used to the novelty of talking to real people with real faces and everything. Okay, so and what I've been asked to talk about is kind of how I got to where I am. I guess that will also tell you a little about who I am. So let's start quite a few years ago. I graduated from Newton North High School in 1974, shortly after they had invented high schools. And my first job was in Waltham, which is where I am right now. My first job was in Waltham. That was at McDonald's. I loved working at McDonald's. It was a blast. Although I confess that when they offered me a swing manager position, I said, I think I'm going to go to college instead. So I think I was rude enough to actually laugh at the offer, which I hope I'm more mature than I was when I was 17. So I went to college and wasn't really sure what to do, but I kind of got bitten by the chemistry bug. I really liked the graphical, sort of visual nature of it. Decided to do research in that area. I did undergraduate research with a guy named Dave Lamal, who looked for all the world like Mr. Clean, like the old advertisements. Then I went to graduate school, and that's like a little something I often point out to people is that if you get admitted to a Ph.D. program, which is kind of the key thing for chemistry, for example, it is free. In case anyone it is free. They pay you to go to school, be a TA, and do your work. So that was down in North Carolina. I worked for a guy named Ned Porter. We worked on the chemistry of how free radicals damage lipids. And so this is something you hear about antioxidants and lipids and rancidity and all that kind of thing. The actual molecular mechanism of that was not understood until the 80s. And so I was part of the team that really sort of pulled that apart. That was fun. At that point, I decided I really wanted to go into academics and be a professor at a university with graduate students, all that kind of stuff. So the way you do that is you go to do a postdoc at a fancy schmancy lab. But at that time, the best place to do organic chemistry in the world was Columbia University. So I went up there, I worked for a guy named Ron Breslow. Very, very high-end group, it was very competitive, but I will say friendly. Many of those people are still friends of mine, although somehow they are in the National Academy of Sciences and I am not, so I'm a little out of joint about that. But I realized the dream, went to University of Pittsburgh where I was on the faculty and had a nice research group and got some funding from the NIH, all that kind of stuff. But it did not work out. I did not hit the bar they wanted for someone to get tenure there, and so I did not get tenure. And I'm not going to tell you, oh, honey, I didn't want it. I wanted it desperately, and it was crushing. And so I spent a few months licking my wounds, but eventually decided that I didn't want to stay in the academic scene and moved into industry, which turned out to be weirdly smart. Occasionally it happens. And had a blast in the industry. I went to Sandoz, which of course merged later on with CU to become Novartis in New Jersey. And I like the collaborative nature of it, the sort of back and forth. the fact that, you know, funding was going down the hall and pounding the desk of the guy who had the budget. And the collaboration between people in different scientific fields was required. It wasn't optional. So I really had a lot of fun with that, and turned out to be very successful that way. And the merger came along. I said, I got enough of that. I don't need to deal with the merger. And it was fine, but I went and I worked at Biogen. So that's how I got back to the Boston area, where you know, my family was all located. And so that was in 1996. And a few years after I arrived there, until 1999 or 2000, I became head of small molecule drug discovery for Biogen. And I had my head down, you know, nose to the grindstone. It was a great place to do research. It was a really wonderful environment. But then one day there was a little problem with an antibody called Tisabri, which was off the market for a while. And so they had to cut back. And so I and 650 of my best friends were laid off from Biogen. It was actually Biogen's first layoff. We had a big party at my house, so there was an upside. And I confess I was a little disoriented, like, holy crap, what am I going to do with myself? But it's a little guy getting tossed off a big ship into the water that's filled with small boats. And so a few months later, I ended up at a little company called Massasoit Therapeutics, which now has done fairly well for itself, making sort of high payload antibody drug discovery, antibody drug conjugates, ADCs. So I worked with them for about a year and a half before, like some of the other guys who'd gotten laid off, had put together a company called Avila Therapeutics, which made covalent inhibitors. And so I really liked that. And both Mersana and Avila were companies where the molecular novelty was what was driving the platform, was what was creating interesting questions. And I've sort of gravitated to those kinds of opportunities. So I went to Avila to be the VP of drug discovery. You know, a few things came out of the clinic from Mersana and then into the clinic from Avila. And then that went well. And then we were bought by Celgene. And a lot of times when you get bought by a larger company, they like take your projects, take your IP, they give you a piece of money, which is not bad. And they say, thank you very much. But actually Celgene wanted kind of a garrison of researchers in the Cambridge, Boston area. And so we had, not only did we have the liquidity event where they give you a nice check, but also we still had jobs. So it was great. So the job I had with them was I became VP of chemistry for Celgene for a few years. And that also meant I went from having about 15 chemists in the Boston area, Bedford at the time, to having all of the scientists, chemists and biologists in Bedford and 50 chemists in San Diego. So that was about 100 people on two coasts. And it was a blast. It was a wonderful job. But you end up spending about 2/3 of your time not at home, which was very difficult. And also, like, I had kids, and the kids were, as I like to say, old enough to notice I was missing and young enough to care. And I work in Boston, like, this is Hollywood. There's got to be something fun to do here. So in 2015, I said, look, guys, love you, it's great, but I have to do something else. And so I actually ended up leaving in August 2015 and working with some investors that I knew from Avila. We founded Arrakis Therapeutics. Arrakis is, so first of all, the goal of Arrakis is to go after RNA instead of proteins, but to go after them with small molecules. Because Americans, for the most part, prefer to eat their drugs, and so we would like to satisfy that requirement. So we went after that. I should say that also Arrakis is, we didn't know the movie was coming. This is fantastic, but it actually is named after the planet in the novel Dune, which is the best-selling novel, science fiction novel of all time. And if you have followed that story at all, it turns out that Arrakis is a planet with precisely one export, which is a drug, which is orally available and enters the CNS. So, like, that sounds good. We should do that. So So we've gotten some funding, which has been fun. We got a seed round for a couple million, then a B round and an A round, and then some big pieces of money out of Broche and then Amgen. To turn your eyes blue. Yes, we call that toxicity. Oh, I love the geek questions. Although it would be kind of cool if it did, right? I have to think about that. A lot of drugs actually do sort of localize to the eyes, but usually you don't like. But anyway, so we got all this money. Now we started off in like a shared workspace in Kendall Square, and then we moved to Waltham. So we've been in various buildings in Waltham, and now we're up the hill on Winter Street in Waltham, and we have about 80 people working for us, and it's a blast. So that's the CV side of my story. All right. So what else was going on during this period of time? Well, I mentioned graduated from Newton North High School and college and graduate school and postdoc and all that kind of stuff. At that time, during that pathway, I was going under the name of Russell Penner. That was my old name. But from the time I was 5, I kind of knew that, well, not even kind of knew, I knew that I wanted to be on the other team, that I was on the wrong team, I wanted to be on the other team, and that you live your life because you basically assume that it's impossible, all right? So you don't. And in fact, in the 1960s, like, you don't talk about this. And that's when I was a kid. In the 1960s, you don't talk about this. If you're talking about being trans as a child in the 1960s, you're lucky if you're not on, some sort of electroshock therapy, right? So just wasn't an open topic for discussion. So I, moved through college, got married to a woman between college and graduate school. No children from that marriage, but that marriage lasted for about 16 years. We separated in 94. But that also, I think that I was beginning to sort of figure out, you're trying to work out what's going on in your own life. And I think that sort of made some of that relationship difficult. But so in the 90s, though, I didn't, you could sort of begin to envision how transition might be possible, but I just didn't see how it was possible for me or even the right thing. So I ended up marrying Kathy, and that was brilliant. The woman's fantastic, and we had 3 kids. We still have 3 kids. Ellie's 22, and then the twins, who are 19. Actually, Ellie's 23. Yeah, it was just. Oh my God, I'm getting old. And the kids are just fantastic. And so, as you think back on your past and ask yourself, well, what about this pathway, or could you have done this differently? Like, yeah, I guess conceivably you could, but then you have a pathway which, like, you don't have your kids, all right? And I'm thinking that would be a terrible life compared to the, who knows really, but in 2011, when the kids were still sort of in middle school, and Kathy got diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer. Now, just to cut right to the chase, she's fine, right? She responded brilliantly to all the treatments, and is a full-on, full-bird, card-carrying survivor. So that's fantastic. But I will tell you, it's a very scary part of your life for yourself, your kids, and for your spouse. And so I think it sort of undermines something in at the foundation, and you sort of realize you don't have forever. So, like, figure it the heck out. And so I think that even at levels below articulation and reasoning, I began to things began to change in me, and new directions became more apparent to me. This culminated in December of 2016, where I started HRT, which is, if you're uninitiated, is a hormone replacement therapy. Working at the Fenway Health Clinic, if you're in the area, they are fantastic. They take all comers. So I started HRT. So you have both an androgen blocker, which is spironolactone, and I'm a drug gal, so I geek out about these things. And then you have the estrogen, which is a patch for me, and you can take it by other routes of administration. But the everyone was worried about deep vein thrombosis, and so you prevent that by not having high Cmax. And so instead of having an injection, which gives you a huge Cmax in your circulation, you built the patch, which is very easy to use. So I started that, and the changes, of course, started happening instantly. And let's just say that without getting too deeply into this, although I'm happy to answer questions, you spend a lot of your life where this difference between gender and sexuality can get very confused. And intellectually, you can know that these are different, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have it all sorted out for you yourself. And like, who are you really? And so for me, it was almost like a pharmacology experiment. And so what happens is you start HRT, and your libido goes from here to here. And if your desire to be on the other side of the gender divide is really largely a sexual one, it will go away. And it not only didn't go away, it became more acute for me. And so I continued to move down this path. And, Kath and I had a lot of things to work out, and frankly, we still do. But she's hung in there, and I'm very appreciative of that. Told the kids in December of 17. So, Elle was like, well, okay, wow, that's kind of interesting. And the twins were all like, you gonna stay together? Right, yes. Does it mean I can go shopping? She says, yes, it does. And one of the things I love about the younger people, those people who are not my age, is that they get the pronouns instantly. I don't think my kids have ever messed up the pronouns. The other thing about telling people before you come out to the rest of the world is that really what you've done is you pulled them into the closet with you. And so you need to be somewhat apologetic, just hang in there. We're gonna open the door to the closet in May. So now we begin to see how this begins to mesh professionally. So I will tell you that in I mentioned that there was things going on even prior to the HRT. So one day in 2014, I showed up at work having pierced my ears, both of them. So when a guy gets one ear pierced, it's clearly, the guy needs to buy a motorcycle and have a midlife crisis. When a guy gets both ears pierced, you're like, that's kind of interesting. That's a little something going on there. And clearly it was. But then that interregnum between coming out to the family and coming out to the world, I had dinner with my boss, and actually on our company website, there's what's called Dark Matter, collection of old blog posts. And one of them is Mike Gilman, my boss, is telling the story of how it is that we got here, all right? At least his experience in my transition. And it's a fun read. But anyway, I took him to dinner, and he asked me, what are we going to talk about? I said, don't worry about it. He says, are you dying? Is your family healthy? Are you going to leave us? You're quitting the job? He says, no, none of that. It's all fine. Don't worry about it. But we can't talk about it until dinner time. And then dinner time, of course, was a very interesting time. He was great about it. But it's many of you probably know, frankly, better than I. All you have to do is start off with those two syllables, which is either in some cases, I'm gay or I'm trans. And in my case, of course, the latter. And that sets everything in motion. I should emphasize that I really wasn't looking for permission. It was really more explaining to Mike, this is about to happen. So everybody needs to get on board. So, and then that was in March of 2018. And April, we had a nice little teleconference with the board of directors, in which I explained what was about to happen. And they were very supportive. And then in May of 2018, we had a party here at work, 2 in the afternoon, where there were margaritas and sushi, and because I like margaritas and I like sushi. But what's interesting is that, first of all, most of the HR playbooks would have your boss bring everyone together. You're absent, and they would explain, absent person here is now going to be transitioning, and here's what's going to happen. But since I had basically caused everyone to join the company, that seemed kind of lame. So I stood up and spoke for myself. Another thing that I thought was funny is, again, referring to the differences in how people react when they're older and younger. Like the older folks tend to be like, oh my God, that's wild, gee, I don't know. And the younger folks are like, that's it? That's why we're having this little thing? All right, fine. What's your name? What are your pronouns? And I heard there was sushi. Is there sushi? so at that point, I also said to people, I am out. Like, you can run down the hall, tell people, you can post it on Facebook, like whatever makes you happy. So, and then in June, this was even more terrifying. June was the day, it was June 18th of 2018 was the day I showed up as Jennifer. I had already done the name change, and, the paperwork is just nightmarish. And then the next frightening thing was that a few months later, well, there was the photo shoot, of course, because we had to update the website suddenly. It's like, all right, fine. But then is that in the fall, people are depending on you. Like, we have to have money to meet our payroll. And so as the chief scientific officer, I had to go out with Mike and Dan, and we had to find $75 million. And so you're, flying to San Francisco and talking to all of the venture capitalists. So we did that, all right? And I will tell you, I don't know what your experience has been like, but at least in the rooms that I was in, like, everybody wants to be the wokest person in the room. Everyone, like, I am just so cool and chill and hip. And so, like, no shade whatsoever. In fact, I will tell you that when people read me as trans, they treat me like a unicorn, like just this adorable little creature, like, oh, it'll go away. Don't frighten it. But if people read me as a woman, I get all the crap that women get. And I'm just here to tell you, in case you needed any reassurance about this, it is all true, honey. And so that's been a big learning experience in and of itself. And so, since then, what I can say is that, I've kind of grown into my new self, and the organization has become very, and frankly, the biotech community more broadly has become very accustomed to who I am, my name, and so that's been very gratifying. So, so one thing that, in terms of how this has affected the company, is that we have, my being so out has actually been a little bit of a small beacon for LGBTQ employees at our company. That is to say, LGBTQ people to become employees at our company. In fact, there was one guy who was here a second ago. He had this long, endless postdoc at Harvard. And I don't think he saw himself as really being a biotech employee until he saw what happened with me. He says, I could probably work for that company because he's gay. And I think he felt a little out of place in corporate culture. And he's come here and worked for us ever since, and that's been fantastic for us. And so, I think it makes it possible for us to, they say diversity is a program, but inclusion is an attitude. It makes it possible for us to achieve not only diversity from the sense of attracting people and bringing them in, but also including them in the sense that, well, okay, fine, you're LGBTQ, great. Show us your slides. There's a certain almost matter of factness about it that I very much appreciate. So I think that it's been interesting to experience what being out has done for our organization and for the people in our organization, and I've been very glad to be a part of that. And then, I guess finally I'd say, if you're interested in biotech and pharma, it's an incredibly diverse set of professional requirements, leaving not just diversity in terms of gender and race and sexual orientation, but also like, we need people to do everything, everything from CEO down to someone's got to move those darn plates around and make sure that we have all the plates we need, which recently has been challenging, to do compound management, to do, prep, to work in manufacturing. These are jobs where just being intelligent and dedicated and frankly a little anal really it really is very helpful. And I'd be glad to answer questions also about how that the kinds of people that we hire. And when we are diverse, when you're a startup company like us, you tend to hire just an astounding number of PhDs. But as you begin to move into things like regulatory and marketing and manufacturing, the kinds of functionalities that you have to include becomes extremely broad. And so I can talk about that as well if you'd like. So I realize that I have rather fallen short of the 45-minute requirement, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I mean, like any questions about my transition, about my job, about what we do here that you might have. And so, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. So if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can go ahead and speak up. I'll get things started off. So here at Massasoit, I have noticed, and I don't come from a STEM background, I come from an art background, but I work within the Division of Science and Mathematics, and I've noticed that a lot of our faculty come from industry backgrounds before deciding to teach at the community college level. So I just wanted to ask, do you ever think about coming back to academia?
I will say that it has occurred to me, but first of all, I am ridiculously well compensated.
So that means you can do something just for the passion of it.
But yes, I mean, I could see a point in my life where that would be appealing to me. But right now, I got 80 people to feed. Help make sure that investors remain interested in us, that we have partnerships, and that the science is moving in the correct direction. And so those are the main things that I do with my day. But I have spent, how should I put it? I have spent my entire career explaining things to people. And so, which basically means you're teaching. You're just teaching in different settings. And so there may come a day when it looks like, this would be the right thing for me. So we'll have to see.
Great, thank you. And I just want to throw it out to folks, if you have any scientific questions. I know a couple of y'all are in the lab here. Feel free to throw those out too. Xavier says, thank you for sharing your story, Dr. Petter. She really enjoyed hearing it.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, I can help you with your organic if you'd like. Although I've moved in a more biological direction. I'm like one of the associate editors for biochemistry, which is the journal of the American one of the journals of the American Chemical Society. And so, I've kind of evolved a little bit, but that's a little side hustle. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we have some students in organic this semester on this call too. Anyone else? Questions?
Yeah, I mean, I really fell in love with it. And let me just tell you, I fell in love with organic chemistry. I didn't get A's. I was competing with all the pre-meds at Dartmouth College in Ivy League setting. And those boys and girls, they hustle. but that's typical of me, is that, the fact that I didn't get the A's, but I did well. And so I stuck with it. I just got to like it. And so, something about turtles and hares. But it really should lean a little bit to the, if you've finished a major, if you finish a major, like in any kind of a 4-year series, graduate school should be on your list of things to think about. And the thing is, you sign up for the Ph.D. program, and then, because master's programs are often not free, but if you sign for the Ph.D. program and then you don't finish it, well, they give you the master's consolation prize, and you can go, oh, boo-hoo, terrible. My master's in chemistry, and move on from there. So anyway, something to think. So there was a question that went by in the chat. So let's have a look at that. Was there anyone who wasn't supportive when you came out? And if so, how did you cope with that? I didn't get real pushback. I will say that that one of my brothers called me up and said, yeah, I don't know, like, do you really want to do this? You're going to cause this problem and that problem. So he was being nice, but he didn't really understand. Like, like if you come out to someone and say that you're gay, like they nowadays they kind of get that, and then they're not going to say to you, well, have you just considered sticking it out with the hetero thing? It's really so much simpler. So it might be true, but what are you talking about? And really, you're sort of in the same category. And I think my mother thought I was out of my mind for maybe a few weeks, and then decided maybe I had really thought this through quite a bit. And I think maybe she was a little put off by the fact that she almost offended by the fact that, well, she should have known, and it's like, well, sorry, Mom. But she's in there now. And there have been, one or two people who turned out to be problematic, but they are not usually they're not usually confrontational. They're people who think they're like being your friend, but maybe not. So, but for the most part, I have to say, no, it's really been pretty much ideal. Let's see, another one. Do you have any advice for people who are out to their families, but their families don't support them? So I haven't really experienced that per se. And there's a related question, did my parents accept you or your friends? So I think a couple of things I should say about that. So first of all, if your family's not supportive, my family has been actually quite supportive. I don't know if they were enthusiastic, but they were supportive. And so for me, though, I came out to people at the age of 60, for God's sake. So you reach a point in your life where, like, your parents need you more than you need them. So it's a very different kind of relationship. Like, if they hate me and they don't want me in the house, I'm like, well, it's going to be sad and unfortunate, but we'll all be fine. Whereas I think if you're very young, that can be a much more challenging problem. And I don't know how to explain that, how to make that better, but I can say that you kind of need to be who you need to be. Again, I think my parents weren't enthusiastic about it, but ultimately I think they came around. Now, I should say that parents and friends, when you say accept who you are, so much of life is about being polite, and so much about being polite is like lying, right? It's like, do I look fat in this? And who's going to say, oh, honey, you are a tubbo? Not many people. And so I don't think that, I think if you probed people about what do they really think about you and your gender identity, and whether you're really a woman, et cetera, I think you might be surprised at how, and it wouldn't line up with like who's Republican, who's Democrat terribly well. You might be surprised at what kind of feedback you got. But for the most part, we don't ask these things. you know? And then you have to ask yourself, how important is it for you to know? So how much acceptance do you need? How deep is that acceptance? How much does their understanding of you need to be congruent with your understanding of you? You know, so I have the ability to ask like certain interesting questions. So if I tell you that I find a man attractive, does that make me straight or gay? And it's a fascinating conversation that ensues from that sometimes. It tells you like what they think your gender identity really is. Oh my God, people. So then what advice would you give to trans and queer people entering the STEM industry? So first of all, I will tell you that I think it's a lot easier to be trans than it is to be queer. That's just my personal opinion. You know, my transition is I went from really a completely male presentation over to as close to a completely female presentation as I can manage. And anything that you find about me to be non-binary is either a problem I'm trying to make peace with or a problem I'm trying to fix, all right? Like even the pronouns I want from the old set to the usual, the other old set. Whereas being queer, I think, is a more challenging proposition because you're asking people to take in and identify you as something that frankly didn't exist as a category before. So now, and I speak with a little bit of knowledge of this because my younger daughter has come out as trans and non-binary and has asked us to use a new name for her, them, and the they, them pronouns. And you'd think, what the heck is wrong with you that you have any problem with this? I'm just telling you, being the parent it's a little hard. It's not conceptually that I'm opposed to this, but it's a little hard. And those they, them pronouns, they do not roll off my tongue. And it is a project. And so I am sympathetic if my pronouns don't roll off the tongue. So it's I think that being queer is I think it's going to become gradually more and more accepted. And I know some people who are genderqueer in fairly senior positions in the industry, but it is unusual, and I hope it becomes more common. You know, I do think that, you know, again, sometimes it comes to what's the politeness part of things. And maybe another way to think about this, and this is a very difficult burden to take on, and I understand, but, you know, at some point you have to bring everyone else for the ride. You know, there's an element of bringing everyone else along on the trip with you. It's tough because you just want people to understand you and take care of you. But sometimes it's the other way around. And you know, that's one of the things about transitioning at 60 is that there are people that are employees who are depending upon me, family who's depending upon me. Like I had to bring them for the ride. Just tell them it's going to be okay. We're going to do this and this and this. So, what are some leadership changes that you've experienced recently with motivation and morale during the pandemic? Yeah, that's been kind of a challenge. I mean, I will tell you that we as a management team have very explicitly taken as we begin to pull out of the pandemic, taken an open mind about work schedule. You know, everyone has to work pretty hard, and we have a great team of people who is very dedicated and very hardworking. But that doesn't mean they have to show up, right? They have to make some decisions on their own to decide how much they need to be here. If you're a lab employee, you probably need to be here about 80% of the time, and you'll figure that out. If you're a manager, like, you know, for me, old, fat manager, like, go away, use Zoom. You're taking up a slot in the building, and you're just a vector for disease. And if you get the disease, you'll probably die. So like, and they actually found a nice way to put it. That's basically the take-home message there. And so we've taken a very flexible approach. And we think that in order to do recruiting at this point in the biotech industry, at least in this part of the country, if you take a very hardline position on people showing up, you're not going to be able, you're going to have a hard time filling your positions. So that has more to do with like accommodation, maybe. As far as motivation and morale, we tried a lot of things. We tried to keep people engaged, some social affairs on Zoom, really setting up a lot of one-on-one meetings wherever was necessary. But I don't know how much of those things that we did were causative and made a positive effect, and how much of it is just that we have a team that figured out how to thrive. But we've really gotten an enormous amount of science done in the past couple of years, and the team kind of just figured it out. So so we're very happy about that.
Anyone else have questions? That was a good one, Robin. I know you got more.
Well, I would also wonder, to that end, as you mentioned, the possibility of coming back to academia when you're ready to collect this pension, and then to add to that one, and I wonder as well if how you would feel coming into education, knowing that a lot has changed, but demonstrating that leadership in the classroom. I think I'm also one of the GSA sponsors, and I'm a professor, but I noticed that we got some folks who aren't so good at adaptation, and that's across the board. But how would you, hypothetically, if you were going to come to teach, what are some things that you would think would be, oh my gosh, this would be, folks need to know this?
All right. So I'm going to come back to Z Adams' question in a moment. Okay, so don't go away. But to address some of that, so there's a number of things that come upward. So one, I remember actually, this is back in the olden days. I actually invited there was an office at University of Pittsburgh where they would come and they would videotape you, and then like when you doing your lecture, and then you could go and look at this. And the first time you looked at it, we're not going to be here, we're not going to say anything. You just sit down, you watch it, and then we can talk. And I watched this thing and I thought, wow, this professor is a real jerk. Clearly has some insecurity issues, and it just needs to relax. And so it really transformed how I taught. It said to me, first, like lose the formal clothes and just loosen up. Another is strive to entertain, and then people will learn a little better. And I observed that. So that, just in terms of my personal style, that certainly affected me. Another is that, that was back when everything was done with paper and pencil. And I mean, heck, we didn't have laptops, for God's sake. And so now it's a very different kind of environment. And some decisions, and sometimes schools have policies about this, about how you communicate. But in some ways, being an industry, like you have to evolve rapidly in terms of how you communicate with people. And so I think that for me, again, personally, that being flexible, like how much of your communication with people will be by email, how much of it will be by Slack, how much of it will be face-to-face, and what about giving lectures over Zoom? And can you have office hours over Zoom, or are they also face-to-face? How do you work with TAs? So I think these are all things that have changed a bit, but I would just have to say, it doesn't scare me. I'm happy to deal with people. Well, I've given lectures before by Zoom. I've given lectures face-to-face. I've done hybrids. It's all lovely. But there are actually some things that from a more pedagogical perspective that I think are fascinating. So, and I actually watched this transition on this very specific topic. So while I was teaching, So it turns out that one of the challenges with organic chemistry is that it's abstract, right? You know, if you're teaching astronomy, you go outside, you look up, there's stars, right? I mean, it's great. It's for all this, it's tangible. If you're talking about zoology or botany, you can go outside, and there's trees, there's squirrels. I mean, it's all very tangible. What's a molecule, right? A molecule is like a tough thing to get a grip on. And one of the areas this was a problem. So when you teach the SN2 reaction, you talk about how the stereochemistry inverts. You know, it was just, you know, like half the kids got it and half of them didn't. And you're like, it's got to be something I'm doing wrong. I don't know. But there was a Monte Carlo simulation on a videotape loop at a Gordon conference by Paul Bash, who was at the Supercomputing Center in Florida at the time. And it showed these things banging around and showed the umbrella inversion. And so I got a copy of this videotape from him and I showed it in my lecture. And the next time I tested it on the inversion, over 90% of the students immediately understood what that meant. And so you made something that's very difficult to grasp, it's very abstract, you made it real for them on TV, right? And so I think that there are elements of visualization and technology which are particularly enabling for chemistry. You know, like some of the videos that show you how translation takes place off of mRNA are just fantastic and really get very material. So there's lots of things that change that I think would impinge upon a teaching experience that would be, you know, very ready to incorporate. That's different than standing there in front of an overhead projector and or a green board and using chalk and kind of lecturing away, which can be very effective actually if you do it well, but there are other ways to get there. So that's my kind of rambling response to your question. To Z's question, do you have any advice to young people like me who are queer? I'm not really in that category myself. I'm in neither category. I'm neither young nor queer, or at least not queer on purpose. I will say that seeing my daughter transition, you know, it really is a transition, but it's like you get on the same train, but you get off at one of the stops in the middle. You don't go to the end of the line, you know, whereas I've gone to the end of the line. And just sort of appreciating that it is still a transition. I guess, you know, if there was anything I would give some thought to is like, understand that it's a project where so much of the world you will need to bring with you, right? That for the people that you think that for whom there's hope, that you're going to have to carry them a bit to the point where they can understand who you are and where you are in the landscape of things. But when it comes to but if it comes to something as fundamental as interviewing, like if they just fundamentally don't get it and they kind of don't want to get it, those are not the right people to work for. But if they're trying, you know, then like I give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll ultimately get where they need to be with you. So let's see that link. Well, to this video that I was talking about, there were no links. This was like 1987, 88, something like that. It was VHS. And so we're talking ancient technologies. But I think you can find these things if you just go onto to YouTube and look for, you know, SN2 inversion and just look for video. I bet you'd find like a dozen of them. So I really think that this is probably out there. So that's what I would recommend at this point. Frank is probably better than what I saw. So, what else? This is fun.
This is great.
Yeah, stereochemistry. I don't know. I love stereochemistry, and it makes a lot of sense to me, and I can sort of visualize it pretty well. But I know that I've seen many students, many good students who struggled with it. But I think that if you can get that visual picture, it will help. And you know, the models that we have can go a long way towards helping solve that problem, and I would use them a lot. But I would say that that the dynamics are not caught with those models. And if I had just one piece of advice for if you're taking organic chemistry, do the problems, all of them. And then when you're done, do them again. That's my advice. Yeah, sorry. So, I will say one of the fun things about teaching is it really undermined a lot of my expectations. So there was these two girls who came into my office for office hours asking all kinds of questions. And one of the things, and they had like their boyfriend's varsity jackets on. And they were kind of snapping their gum a little bit and asking questions, but they had no like, they were trying to protect their intellectual personae. So they would just ask whatever the heck was on their minds. And you just, you know, you explain to them where they're at. They did well in a tough course. They did well. And so they just came across as like, you know, like the kind of kids who, you know, maybe you shouldn't be here, but in fact, they knocked it out of the park. And there was a guy who was in the pharmacy school at Pitt who took organic from me. And he was, you know, the pharmacy school students, their parents clearly expect them to go like work at CVS or something, get a real job. But he crushed the course, and the pharmacy students generally didn't. He crushed it. And what was particularly irritating is he never came to me for help. just crushed it all on his own. And so now he's on the faculty at University of North Carolina. So, you know, they did well for himself. So I've always liked, you know, running into students who just undermine my expectations.
I have a question. So we've established that you're probably a pretty big Dune fan. I just wanted
to be fair, I have not read all the sequels, and I do not own a still suit. All right, let's just
well, you're working on that though, right?
Well, we'll see.
I just wanted to ask if there were any other pieces of science fiction or other media that are influential and important to you.
Well, science fiction I've read a lot of. And so first of all, you know, in terms of sci-fi lit crit, I am convinced that Robert A. Heinlein was a closeted transgender, right? And if you've read it, so read Podkane of Mars, read I Will Fear No Evil, read, you know, there's a few other things. Like read Friday, you know, I think he was a closeted trans. But he was a fantastic writer, a little too far right of center for my taste now, but he was a fantastic storyteller. So I really liked a lot of his work. You know, more recently, people like Dan Simmons and Richard Powers and Paolo Bacigalupi, I think is his name. These are like authors that have really sort of reached me. So I would recommend those. So yeah, I like a lot of, and I read a lot of science, and not just the primary scientific literature, but also, you know, people who write about fields that are not my field, but they explain in a way that is pretty readily absorbed. I guess if you were asking about books that really influenced my intellectual growth, one would be Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. It's a very eye-opening book. And another is Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach. It's just a mountain fascinating reading. So those very strongly influenced me back when I read those. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you. All right, it's just about 1 o'clock, so unless anyone has any final questions and wants to throw them out there. Thank you very much for joining us. This was wonderful. And we really appreciate you being here. And I just want to say, if you ever need to practice those they them pronouns, I'm around, and we have some folks in the chat who are around, so feel free to we would love to meet again and talk further about.
Well, to her credit, to their credit, they will yell at me, in no uncertain terms. Oh my God, so sorry.
That's one way to get it through.
I'll get there eventually. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank